And we're on starting chapter 4 in our book, in Tibet in the Himalayas. When I was reading this, I kept thinking of 2 books that I had read. One was, what was that woman's name? Vajraprana, who went in. Alexandra David Neal, who was one of the first European women to go into Tibet. And she came out with a Tibetan Lama. And I remember reading the Dalai Lama's Exodus of Tibet. And this rather reminds me of both of those. So, and as of last week, we were left with how much Swami Akhandananda felt that he had encountered the divine play of Mahamaya, seeing the living form of Mahamaya immanent in the world, in those mountains. He saw the huge form of the mountain, the infinite of infinite bliss. Okay, so, in Tibet in the Himalayas, having beheld the eternal sport of Shiva and Shakti in the sacred grounds of nature, Gangadhar in his joy forgot everything, the fatigue of the perilous journey, the world around him, and even the awareness of his temporal self. Gradually, he remembered that his journey was also to include Badri, Manasasavar, and Kailash. He passed a few blissful days in the sacred region of Kedar, holy as heaven itself, and then directed his steps toward Badri Narayan. He descended to Gaurikund, then to Nalachati, and across the Mandakini. He climbed up to Okimat, then to Tunganat, and down again to Kobeshwar. From this place, he walked along the Alaknanda, reciting verses describing the identity of Hari and Hara, till at last he reached his destination, Badriham, chosen by God himself as his seat for meditation. The thought of this incomparable place, where every particle of dust, every pebble, every blade of grass is sacred, increased his joy 100-fold. It was to Badrika Ashrama the Bhagavan Sri Krishna sent his ardent devotee Uddhava for tapasya. It was here that the great sage Vyasa classified the Vedas and composed the Puranas. Here again that Shankara wrote his commentaries and founded a center for the knowledge of the self. From the beginning, this holy place has always been kept apart for silent meditation and for the realization of the self. But the object of his trip to Kedar fulfilled, Gangadhar's heart was filled with highest reverence for this great tirtha. And though he felt inclined to stay a few days longer, it was already time to start for Tibet. With a prayer that he might come again, Gangadhar left for Mana, a village near Badripuri. He soon became acquainted with the village people and the village chief, Sher Singh. He learned from him that the best time to make the journey to Tibet was with the coming of the rains. The path here is difficult and dangerous, and Manasasavar is far distant by this route, the chief told him. Pilgrims generally choose the Niti Pass from Joshimat and then go into Tibet. He even forbade the young pilgrim to take the route through the Mana Pass. These villagers, whose forebears came from Rajputana, were known as Marchas. By long tradition, they traveled regularly to Tibet for purposes of trade. Describing the hardships and dangers of the route, They advised Gangadhar to abandon his plan. They also told him how sadhus had died attempting to travel through the Mana Pass, but they failed to alter his resolution. They also advised him to stay on at Badrinarayan for a year in order to become acclimatized and then proceed to Tibet. But Gangadhar was bent on proceeding to that very year and by the same route that he had chosen. A few days later, he started the same route that he started out with a caravan of traders, but they were badly organized, and there were many mishaps even from the outset. Consequently, 2 of their beasts of burden became frightened, and while crossing over a broken wooden bridge, jumped from the bridge and were killed. The incident shocked Gangadhar, and he returned to Mana. His first attempt having failed, Gangadhar was on the alert for a fresh opportunity. Shobha Pradhan, another leading man of the village, proposed to escort him to Tibet 4 or 5 days later. In the meantime, Adaba, a monastery officer from the Tuling Buddhist monastery in Tibet, arrived at Mana on business. Gangadhar became acquainted with him by means of signs, the two having no common language. Shobha Pradhan set off the following day at dawn for Tibet with the Tuling officer's men, and Gangadhar went with them. At Keshav Prayag, the last confluence of the Alaknanda and the Saraswati, they crossed the natural bridge of rock spanning the swift-flowing Saraswati. Then they made their way along the bank of the river, the bank rising higher and higher as they proceeded. On these hills, there was scarcely any trace of man or beast to be seen. One has to pass through thick clouds at times, which make visibility very difficult, following the person in front only by his sound. Thus, like a blind, they advanced very cautiously. Midway through the Mana Pass, Gangadhar was delighted to see Himalaya Puri, the birthplace of Parvati, the Divine Mother. Nowhere in the Uttarakhand had Gangadhar to travel through such a terrifying route as this. Keeping the Lord in mind and repeatedly calling out to Shobha Pradhan, he remained in touch with him after the rest of the party had fallen behind. In this way, they walked a long distance through the narrow and dark, cloud-covered pass. In these cold regions, a grain grows which looks like grass. The hill people make bread from its flour. It is bitter and is known as katu. At noon, Shobha Pradhan gave Gangadhar a portion of the dough prepared from this flour, along with some sour sauce. It was not palatable, but it increased body heat, so he swallowed the stuff like medicine. Shobha Pradhan was expecting his men to catch up with them by mealtime, but there was no sign of them. All the supplies for the hazardous journey were with them. Shobha Pradhan expressed his regret to Gangadhar, for their delay caused much hardship for both of them. Pradhan's men had not arrived by nightfall, and the two had to pass the night in a cave without food or sleep. The next morning, they continued their ascent up the densely clouded mountain. Gangadhar felt difficulty in breathing the rarefied air. After crossing the snowy areas of the Himalayas, they arrived on the ice-clad plateau of Tibet. Here Shobha Pradhan showed Gangadhar the way to Tuling Monastery, while he parted with him, taking the route followed by traders. Gangadhar journeyed on, barefoot and scantily dressed in this ice-bound region. One evening he found no shelter and spent the night on the ice. Fortunately, the following morning, a monk of the Buddhist monastery out collecting fuel found the half-frozen Gangadhar in poor condition and carefully carried him to the monastery. The monks warmed and nursed him, and he soon came round. The lamas at Tuling Monastery marked that he was a man of unbroken continence and treated him with great respect and cordiality. Gangadhar always carried a photograph of Sri Ramakrishna with him. While he was at Tuling Monastery, a lama took it from him and placed it beside Buddha's image, where he offered worship to it. The lama became extremely curious to know whose photo it was. He said that such eyes were not those of an ordinary man, and that he must be Lord Buddha. After much persuasion, the lama returned the photo to Gangadhar. In a fortnight, Gangadhar was able to understand many Tibetan words and learned a good deal about the religion and customs of the people. He was even able to take part in religious discourses and charm the lamas. Many of these lamas could recall memories of former births. He met 3 or 4 such lamas. In a short time, the stranger had gained the love and respect of all in the monastery, especially that of the Tasi Lama. One day, a lama showed him special honor by waving a lighted butter lamp before him. Gangadhar noticed that the centers of Tibetan culture were the monasteries and temples. The temples held large statues of various gods. The monasteries were all full, some with 3,000, 4,000, or even 7,000 lamas. They practiced worship and meditation. Some repeated the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum. Others meditated on the total void. The first principle held by all was, Buddha is my ideal, and all I have is for the good of others. This lofty ideal is the common basis of all spiritual practices in Tibet. The idea, all that is mine is for the good of all, had a great influence on the youthful mind of Gangadhar, and in time it became part and parcel of his character and philosophy. Gangadhar was happy to be in the calm, beautiful, and austere atmosphere of Tibet. Everywhere there were numerous caves and mounds inscribed with mantras. The lamas held in their hands a metal wheel with Om inscribed on it, which was turned constantly. Everything in the country seemed to contribute to an atmosphere of spirituality. Gangadhar was very conscious of this. Though the Tibetans have always had respect for true spiritual aspirants and served them, they retained some suspicion about the young monk because of India's connection with the British. Their doubts gradually deepened. The people outside the monasteries and temples were generally poor, for grain was scarce. They barely managed to subsist by tending goats and sheep. For the greater part of the year, they endured a miserable existence in small tents. Gangadhar's knowledge of the Tibetan language became a source of trouble as time passed. Once he spoke of the sufferings of the common people to the lamas. They did not approve of it, and summoning him one day, placed a sheathed sword on his shoulder, warning him against speaking further on the subject. His trader friends also warned him, telling him that to continue to express these concerns would be risking his life to no avail. However, sympathy for the poor was as natural to Gangadhar as breathing. In spite of the warnings, words of sympathy for the poor continued to escape his lips. The poor folk loved him, and once several of them, in a drunken state, told the lamas of his sympathy for them. Gangadhar was summoned again. This time, the lamas said they would cut open his jaws or keep him in lifelong imprisonment if he persisted in speaking out for the peasants. With the help of some friends, he was able to escape with his life. Having spent 3 or 4 months in a western province of Tibet, the traveler had gained much experience. By the end of October, he returned to Budri by way of the Niti Pass. Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, is in the eastern part of the country, and for the Lamas, it is the chief place of pilgrimage. Gangadhar intended to return to Tibet the following year and to visit Kailash, Manasasavar, and Lhasa. With this end in view, he kept in touch with the Tibetan traders. Okay. He spent a few days at Badri Narayan, but the severity of the winter drove him down to Hardwar. He left Hardwar after a few days for some other sacred spots in the Uttarakhand. On this occasion, he visited the 5 Kedars and the 5 Badris, passing 6 months in Tapasya in these lonely and silent regions. Some of these places were difficult and dangerous to approach. One can form some idea of the faith and trust that sustained the young Gangadhar on these travels from his words of later years. In the Himalayas, I would risk my life at times to see if the master were by me. If so, he was sure to save me. One day at nightfall, I was walking through a forest with just such an attitude of foolhardiness when I came across a party of woodcutters. They shouted out to me, "Don't proceed any further that way. A bear is prowling about." I thought to myself, the master always has his eyes on me. If he saves my life, well and good. Otherwise, what do I care if I live or die? I continued on my way, and the master protected me. But while walking, I found a blood-stained cloth, as well as fresh human bones and flesh. He was still very young when he did this. At this time, he came across an ideal place for meditation near a village in the hills. Here he made his meditation seat. For some days, the people of the village had been living in terror of a tiger. They feared that if the sadhu remained outside alone at night, the tiger might attack him, and the sin of his death would fall upon them. So, with many importunities, they persuaded him to give up the idea of living in the open, and gave him a tiny room in the village. To keep the tiger away, the villagers built fires all around their houses. The thick, choking smoke made meditation impossible for Gangadhar. He thought to himself, "What? Have I come to this place to think of God? Am I fearful for my life?" Thinking thus, he returned to the open place he had previously chosen. With a feeling of relief, he sat down, passing the night alone in meditation. Next morning, the villagers came to see him and were happy to find him still alive. They treated him with milk and tea and left him alone to continue his way. This isolated place in the Himalayas is known as Dasharata Kidanda, the staff of Dasharata, as the mountain precipice is as straight as a rod. Tigers and bears were plentiful in that area. Here Gangadhar spent 3 nights in meditation. One moonlit night, while in deep meditation, he had a vision, and he will describe it. All of a sudden, I felt the master behind me standing with one end of his dhoti over his shoulder. "Look here," he said. "There is the play of Purusha and Prakriti without beginning or end. The Himalaya is the Purusha, and its flora, fruits, and flowers is Prakriti. This is what they call the dance of Prakriti on Purusha." So saying, he began to sing. "You will hurt the great God's breast. Step down, dance no more, you mad woman. Shiva is not dead, but alive in yoga. Your dancing will break his ribs. Once he swallowed poison, but now has lost his vigor, so his eyes are closed. The master went on singing this song with his hand on my shoulder. I can't describe in what unalloyed joy I spent that night. In this way, Gangadhar spent months in these remote and unknown places in the Himalayas, testing his faith and reliance on the master, and experiencing the master's care and love for him. In May 1888, when the temple doors of Badrinath were again opened after the winter, he returned there. Drawn to the life center of the Himalayas, he spent 3 months in tapasya at Badri. And then, with a view of going on to Kailash, he entered the Daba district through the Shipchilim Pass. From here he attempted to proceed to Lhasa, but the local police arrested him and kept him in custody as a British spy. However, his friends among the traders stood bail for him and got him released. Although the police would not allow him to go to Lhasa, they did not object to his going on to Kailash and Manasarovar. With a group of tradesmen, Gangadhar now turned his steps towards Kailash and Manasarovar. On this route, there was an ever-present fear of bandits. One day, Gangadhar actually fell into the hands of a band of these outlets. His presence of mind saved him. Offering them molasses and fried rice at an opportune moment, he escaped and proceeded to Mount Kailash without further trouble. Both Kailash and Manasarovar rest on an ice-covered plateau. At times, fierce blizzards blow at Kailash, but the prevailing atmosphere of the place is deep silence. Being far above areas of human habitation, it is very suitable for meditation. To Pramadadas Babu, Gangadhar wrote, "Really, it is extremely quiet here. After seeing these hills and lakes, I forgot you altogether. Oh, what great joy! What shall I do? Such is the influence of this place, and I cannot but stay here for some time more. My health has not suffered. Rather, everything has been borne with joy." Manasarovar is a large, transparent, freshwater lake of melted ice on the Tibetan plateau. Its circumference is about 50 miles, with 8 Buddhist monasteries around it. Large statues of lamas and deities are to be seen within the monasteries. Mount Kailash, surrounded by 6 monasteries, is covered in perpetual snow and is a natural emblem of Shiva. A monk in one of the monasteries taught Gangadhar a yogic asana, the practice of which in the beginning creates so much heat in the system that one is unable to keep the body covered. When Gangadhar asked what was to be done with the asana, the monk replied, "Do nothing, but keep the mind free of all thoughts." Whatever its other merits, the asana was found useful for preserving the body in those cold regions. I think we've all seen pictures of the monks sitting up in those cold regions with very little on and wondering, how can they do that? That's how they did it. While at Kailash, Gangadhar desired greatly to utilize his time in sadhana and tapasya. During his stay, he was the guest of a rich and devout Kamba, a nomadic tribesman of Lhasa, who lived at Chekra, a village near Kailash. One day, seeing the photo of Sri Ramakrishna by Gangadhar's bedside, the Kamba took it up. As he gazed at it, he lost all sense of the external world for some time. Then he said to Gangadhar, "Where did you get this? Leave it with me. I shall worship it every day. It is Buddha himself, or how could I be in this state simply by looking at it? A mere human being cannot have such a face." He placed the photo on his altar near Buddha and the other deities, worshipping it daily, along with the rest, by waving a lamp and incense. One day, Gangadhar managed to take it away without the Kamba's knowledge. He had to keep stealing back his picture. In early November, after 5 months' stay at Chekra, Gangadhar returned by way of the Needy Pass to Badri Narayan. As the temple there had already closed for the winter, he visited Kumaon, Bageshwar, Almora, Nainital, Ranikat, and other places, finally arriving at Karnataka. The whole winter of 1889, Gangadhar spent in pilgrimages. One day, while on his way to Devaprayag, he suddenly saw Swami Shivananda. Gangadhar was then wearing the robes of a Tibetan Lama, and his face had grown black from exposure to cold. He was hardly recognizable. He called out to Swami Shivananda, "Dada," which means brother. The Swami at once recognized his voice, and holding him in his arms, exclaimed, "Ganga, you are still alive. All of us at the monastery have been sadly wondering what had become of you." They both shed tears of joy, and Swami Shivananda told him of how they had taken the vows of sannyas. He advised Gangadhar to go back to the monastery and take his vows, assuring him that this would gladden the hearts of his brothers. The two then set off for Kedar and Badrinath, but from where Swami Shivananda posted a letter to Bharanagore, relating the good news of his meeting with Gangadhar and the advice he had given him. However, instead of returning to the monastery, Gangadhar proceeded to Almora, and still eager to visit Lhasa, waited 2 months at Badri, before making a third journey to Tibet via the Niti Pass in July 1889. For Gangadhar, the Himalayas, especially the snowy regions, held a great attraction. Of them he wrote, "The Himalayas, range upon range, are mostly covered with snow. The ice in these parts never melts. All around it is spotless white in complete silence." This natural love he had for the snows charmed the Tibetans and hillmen, endearing him to their hearts. He had crossed these icy regions so often that he became known to the people as Barafani Babu, a sadhu of the snowy regions. Many people at these places knew him well and loved him. And I think we will stop there for today. Does anyone have any questions or comments about what we've read? That's quite a bit that we have read today.
When they say llama, do they mean
I'm
the
sorry,
animal?
could you speak just a little louder, Elizabeth?
When they speak about a llama, do they mean the animal, or is
No,
that?
they mean a lama, Lama, the Tibetan monks.
Okay.
And if I'm not mistaken, almost every male in Tibet at that time spent some time in the monasteries as a lama, as they do in Thailand. Because when you can say that there were 4,000, 6,000, or 7,000 lamas in the monastery, that's most of the younger men getting their education. I believe that's...
But not all monks are lamas. You have to be reincarnated to be a lama.
I'm sorry?
But most monks aren't lamas. You have to be reincarnated to be a lama, at least in Tibetan Buddhism. It shows you how big that monastery was.
Okay. You have to have what to be a lama?
You have to be a reincarnate.
Oh, you have to be reincarnated and remember your past lives to be a lama.
And someone can indicate that you are that lama.
Okay. According to Tibetan Buddhism. Somehow, it seems, well, I don't know. So,
I was kind of confused why they were down on him for wanting to honor the poor when, as Buddhists, their life is in honor of everybody else. You know what I'm saying? I'm not saying it well.
no, I know what you mean, though, Subhadra.
Must have been
There's,
political.
there's also, cultural things that are going on as well as religious things. And culturally, in one way, the monasteries were very closed communities that were supported by the workers who lived, much like England had been with the serfs around the castles. So that would be my only explanation.
Mm-hmm.
It not from the point of Buddhism, but from the point of how society worked in that area.
Yeah.
What do you think, Vajrapana?
There was a huge disparity in wealth.
Yeah.
The very rich and the very poor. And the Dalai Lama said that was one reason why it was good that the Chinese
Yes.
because that was they were able to have a correction.
Yeah, what Vajrapana is saying is, I didn't quite want to go that far, but the Dalai Lama did speak of the huge disparity between the wealth of the monasteries and the poverty of the people around, and that's what gave the Chinese their opening to come into Tibet, which in one way has been a blessing, as he said. The world would never have known of Tibetan Buddhism if the Chinese had not taken over, and he had had to flee. So that is, who knows, part of the play of Maya, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, now we will have the gospel reading Saturday evening at 5 here in the temple. And the topic of my topic on Sunday is, who is my mother? And some of you will wonder, but this is the period of mother worship in all of India, and we're worshiping every mother. And which one is it? Okay, so that will be at 11 o'clock on Sunday. And as I say, probably Vajrapana will be reading, taking you into Lhasa or Ladakh next Wednesday. Okay? Everyone stay well and see you see you hopefully Saturday. Okay? Right. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat, Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.